Okay, so welcome everybody to the Technical Steering Committee meeting for October 17th, 2018. We'll follow our standard agenda, starting with if anybody has any announcements that they'd like to share. If nobody else has any others, the one I will put out there is, I know that I was just asked to add a meeting to our calendar for next Monday at 2 Eastern Daylight Time related to working on the Node.js, the discussions around merging those two foundations. So if you're interested in participating, here's a call out to the TSC members, plus anybody else who's listening. That's an opportunity to get involved in those discussions. I think that's all I have. So if nobody else has any other announcements, we'll move on to the items on the agenda. My recommendation is that we start with 23.155, since we've got Raphael here as a guest to talk about that one. So we should do that, and then let him drop off if he wants to. So any objections to that? No? Okay, so this is 23.155, and the topic is formalized non-constant reference usage in C++ style guides. So I don't know if Anna or Raphael, who we should ask to start. Maybe Raphael, why don't you outline some of your thoughts on that front?
It goes back a little bit, a little bit. So I'll give a tiny bit of background on myself. I have roughly 20 years experience programming C++. I've been trying to refresh my knowledge with what now is referred to as modern C++, which is C++ from 2011 and 2014. In 2017 and the upcoming C++ 20. Concurrently, about 6 months ago, turned on C++ 14 as the standard we're compiling following changes in V8. While I'm reading and reviewing and learning our code base, a discussion came up between me and Anna around two subjects. Originally, it was two subjects: the use of auto and the use of non-const references, i.e., references variables. So Anna stated that the common rule is not to use auto and not to use references. So, I wouldn't say naively, but I asked, where is that stated? Let's start a discussion about that, because that's kind of against where the language is going. And by where the language is going, I'm using as reference the ISO committee, the people who are writing books about best practices in C++. There's a very interesting project called the C++ Core Guidelines, which is a living document in GitHub that's written by Herb Sutter and Björn Starstrup, two of the major leaders in the language, and it kind of breaks down best practices and kind of explanations of what each of the language features are and what are typical idioms in modern C++. The language has shifted towards, or let's say their intent is to shift it towards coding for intent rather than the classical way of programming C with classes that included a lot of memory, pointer arithmetic, casting, being very, very specific about how you write down algorithms. And they are shifting towards more standardized semantics of idioms, of language features and their use, a more heavier use of the standard library, and shifting the optimization work to the compilers. One of their main points that they push is code for intent, not for the compiler. And for that, they give a ton of examples. One of them is, for example, is the use of auto. Auto is, for those who doesn't know, tells the compiler the variable that I'm declaring is still strongly typed. It has a very specific type known at compilation time. It's just that during initiation, the right-hand side has a definite type, and so the compiler can automatically derive the type. And their argument is, we already do that. We already do that when we do templated programming, and we say template type name T, and then we put T, and we let the compiler fill out the rest of it. And they say, similarly, there's the use of auto. It doesn't give the compiler any new information. All the information is there. It's just on the right-hand side instead of on the left-hand side. So we had that debate in a different PR, and which was written down as, don't use auto unless you're saving yourself a lot of time. That's how we decided to write it down. And I said, okay, it's a fairly not meaningful, not significant optimization or convenience or syntactic sugar. I'm not gonna fight over that. Let's split the discussion about auto and about reference variables and discuss reference variables in more detail. And I opened a PR, which states, for those who didn't read it, using non-const references often obscures which values are changed by an assignment. A pointer is almost always a better choice. And that is something that I feel is a little bit too general. At the time, the wording was more harsh, so I described it as arbitrary, because apart from this very subjective way of looking at it, there are no real example. I didn't see any references I was looking, like where did this rule came from? I didn't find any. Anna didn't provide any, except for saying this is how we've been doing it. And ever since then, I've been trying to narrow down like what don't we like about reference arguments. So there are places, for instance, in the Google style guide, in the C++ core guidelines, where they say, for instance, references as arguments to functions don't make sense in a lot of cases. Their main point, their main strength, or the idiomatic interpretation of a non-const reference argument is when you want to pass what's called an in-out parameter. When you have a parameter that lives in an outer scope, and you want to give it to the function to use, to change, and then essentially give it back to you, but not through, not via the return mechanism, but via an in-out parameter. And both the C++ core guidelines and the Google style guide say, don't do that. There are other ways to do that. You can do that by pointer. You can now, C++ 11 has what's called pairs and tuples, meaning you can return multiple times via the return mechanism. Don't do that. And also trying to figure out what is the reasoning behind that. From my point of view, and I'm going to be a little bit critical, I didn't get a lot of counter arguments. There are people who are agreeing with this perspective. I'm agreeing with this perspective. I think there's consensus about designing APIs without non-cost references. But I think that saying don't use non-const references, pointers are better, it's not, I don't think it's the right thing to do. Not in the guide, not like as a rule in the guideline, as something that we want to enforce later, and something we want to, somebody who's new. I'm giving myself as an example, somebody who just, read a couple of books, took a course, did some exercises, is coming into Node, he wants to write, he wants to use what he learned, and then we come and tell him, no, what you learned is wrong, we have our own rule, we don't have a good justification for it, but don't do that. And it affects our code in that a lot of new functionality that comes in through libraries, a lot of new functionality that has been standardized into the standard library uses non-const references, specifically for mutating containers. For instance, if you have a vector of values and you want to go over that vector and mutate every value, or you want to search and mutate different things. For instance, you have a string and you want to, that's a real example, you have a string, which is a vector of characters, and you want to change all of the underscores to dashes. The idiomatic way is to use, use const references, and if we don't use non-const references, it limits our ability to use standardized and idiomatic ways, and that's my point.
So, oh great, never mind. You just promoted Joey. Okay, I'll stop.
I guess that, that's a good introduction and a good framing, Raphael. Thanks. I guess Anna, do you have things you want to add to that, and I guess other people as well?
And after Anna, Nikita had a question, but let's let Anna talk first.
So for the most part, that was a decent overview. So a couple of things like Raphael mentioned that we didn't provide any references for where these rules come from. They are pretty much what Google does, and while Google only specifies them in their style guide for APIs, for functions, this matches with the style that they use, or at least that V8 uses. Well, I would say that while I get where Raphael is coming from and everything, and I appreciate the effort to make Node.js newcomer friendly, and maybe this is doing this, but there's also like a lot of value in having code that is easy to read and to verify as correct by looking at it, because that is what a lot of reviewers do. And well, yeah, we have been following this particular style, which this PR is trying to write down, because it makes it more obvious whether one assignment may change some other value or not. And, yeah.
So Nikita had a question. Unless, did you have more to say, Anna? I'm sorry.
Just go ahead.
Okay. Nikita asked in the chat, how would this decision, accepting or not accepting this PR, how would it affect the actual code?
So just to mention it, this is writing down a rule that that we follow, but that has only been enforced through reviews so far, and not through a part in our style guide or the linter.
Yeah. So if we're putting these things in review comments, the understandable theory is they should be in a style guide.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking, like, we've mentioned a great deal of arguments in favor and against using these non-const references. Would it not be helpful if we listed the arguments in the PR more explicitly, rather than just saying that pointers are almost always better? Because we've just listed a whole pile of reasons why amongst ourselves. And when we do that, then we can draw a conclusion at the end about the specific cases in which they can be used and so forth. I realize that the style guide will be more verbose as a result, but if we conclude with an overarching statement based on previous discussion, then we can have like a TLDR version of it and not be just even apparently arbitrary about the whole thing. So, you know, I was just thinking, like, better documentation will solve this. Is that not true?
I'm very much in favor. So one of my main motivations here was to write down everything, but I was a little bit more demanding in that I wanted a motivation, an explanation. We just landed a couple of days ago a basis, a framework for our style guide that says we strive to follow the C++ core guidelines unless they conflict with the Google style guide and unless they conflict with our style guide. So there are several clauses that deal with this particular subject in both of those guides, and we did some unverbosing. We took the part of the style guide that talked about memory management and smart pointers, and we turned it into a list of references and like a TLDR of what we recommend in doing. In this case, I couldn't find, really good arguments about not using, about the general don't use non-const references. And also to say that this is how V8 has been coding, it's also, it's not completely, straight cut. Google and the V8 team has been trying to modernize their style, their code. They have APIs. They have actual APIs that use non-const references. We encountered, me and Anna, in a review this week, like an easy way to use maybe return values is with non-const references as an API to V8. I had very short conversations with people in Google who do reviews, which say, yeah, we want to do more modern C++. And again, like I'm missing like the motivation to be so cut and dry. Pointers are almost always a better choice. That's a very
Okay. We want to hear Nikita, right?
Yep.
Yes. Hello. So first of all, Raphael, please excuse me for interrupting you in the chat. I thought that I just wanted to clear a question for answering later. I did not want to interrupt you. So the actual question is, as I understood, this pull request just documents the we were currently following while reviewing other pull requests. That just recommends the de facto rule that we used. Is that correct?
I don't have like I don't do that. I don't tell people don't use non-const reference unless they make code that looks weird. There were several examples of that, and when I was writing C++ for Node a couple of years ago, I didn't get those comments, so I'm taking Anna's word at it. So.
Do you have any code that does not follow that rule?
Oh, a ton. Like I said, there are several V8 APIs that require you to use non-const references. There are a few new improvements or modernizations that were just very simple and very idiomatic looking when you use non-const references. So I'm saying it's not like. Also, from what I'm seeing, we have been fairly lax, fairly easy with enforcing our style guide for the C++ side because, from my opinion, a lot of it is because it's based on this lore passed by word of mouth from one generation to another. So newcomers come and they try to do something and people tell them, no, you're doing it completely incorrectly. So the number of people who are actually doing reviews is kind of small. So we don't really adhere to the style guide that we already have. And the barrier of entry is kind of high because you don't know, am I allowed to do that? Am I not allowed to do that? So in that sense, it won't be introducing a mass of new weird code into our code base. I don't think so.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Am I interrupting you? So I think in some way our C++ code is basically VA C++ because when I was approached by new contributors and asked like why our C++ code base seemed to be different from other projects, my reply tend to be that this is mostly VA C++, you do not use, so a lot of times you use maybes, you use handles, you need to like take care of the scopes. So if we are going to choose a style, I think we should basically go with the VA style because you have to interact with the API a lot. It's kind of weird if you suddenly change the interface like once you leave the VA API level up to the node level, you suddenly change the style. It would be kind of weird. And I just took a look at the VA APIs, and most of the non-const references there are operator overloads. Most of the time, they still use pointers. So I don't think like we should just point out that pointers are always not preferred. But we should probably, in my opinion, we could like list out different occasions like in and out parameters, return values, and use specific examples that allow us to like interact with the VA APIs in a more consistent way. I think that will make the code easier to read. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Did I get back just in time for the kick it back to GitHub proposal?
Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
I have a question. I think the last one of basic questions for this. It's to Rafael, I think. So the question is, if we relax that rule, if we assuming that we are following the just de facto rule for our pull requests, like I believe Anna said, assuming that we can relax that rule and like reject that pull request and not follow that rule, what can we change in our existing code base that would improve it, in your opinion?
So for instance, there's the new pattern of for range of a for that runs over a container to mutate it. A lot of our code uses what's called range checking, meaning checking that the iterator runs from the beginning to the end and doesn't cross the bounds of the container. A for range does that automatically. A for range cannot do out of bounds manipulation on a valid container. To mutate that container, we need a non-const reference. There's a new function coming in C++ 17, and it's already implemented in a lot of our compilers. That is called for each. That can do a loop like for each in JavaScript. That can take a lambda and run it over a container for every value. It needs to have a non-const reference. There's the construct of pairs and tuples, which group parameters together. It's much easier to interact with the output if you destructure the pair or tuple with non-const references. When you receive, even when you receive a pointer from a function and you know for certain that the value cannot be null, which is sort of a characteristic of a reference instead of a pointer, you can dereference that once and let the compiler keep track of that variable for you, and you don't have to pay for the dereferencing every time. You can make your code cleaner and more correct because you explicitly say, this code cannot deal with a null value, it will explode. So you get early failure. I think it will make our code more standard. I don't think it will be very different from V8. And as an aside, V8 is a good basis, but I don't agree completely that we should base, and this is not exactly style. These are best practices. These are giving semantics to language constructs. I don't completely agree that we should infer what the people that wrote V8 were thinking when they used certain constructs with our own interpretation, when we can, go to a well-formed reference such as the Google style guide and C++ core guidelines, and say, when I use a non-const reference, what does that mean? If that function takes a non-const reference, what does the API designer tell me? And that will reduce, I think, a lot of the weirdness and obscurity, because if it will be commonplace, then when you see a non-const reference, you assume that it's changing something, that it's not just out of convenience. It's there because it has a reason.
Ali has his hand up.
Ali, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Or you have a broken microphone or something.
Yeah, his mute doesn't seem to be on.
So he just wrote on the chat that he wants to kick it back to GitHub. I mean, like, I would have something to say to what Raphael just said, because I definitely don't agree with the last part of it. But
sure. Well, if you wanna give your last comments, and then maybe we can take it back to GitHub.
I mean, like, so as I understand it, one of the main arguments that you just made was that non-const references in APIs indicate that a value is probably going to be changed by that API. But the thing is, that is just like just about as true for pointers as it is for references, because there's also a concept of const pointers and or const references, which we use extensively, and for the opposite use case. So I don't think that distinction is actually being added or removed from our API. And
so I agree.
The one thing that I mainly agree about is that, it is a problem with pointers that they can be null instead of having an actual value that they point to. But,
so I would quickly like to propose, if you can hear me, I would quickly like to propose this. So we can split this discussion into two discussions. One is documenting the current style guide. And I feel confident in saying that our current style guide is to follow the Google style guide, which says, which matches up with what Anna has posted. If there's debate about the style guide, let's have it back on GitHub, right? So we should document what we have now, and whatever modification is needed, let's do it on GitHub.
Basically, what you're suggesting is land the current PR and then potentially have a new PR to change it into something else?
Right, if necessary.
Right.
So I don't have any good objections to that, except for I I'm looking for references, explicit, direct references. For instance, if there is a comment in the current Google style guide that's saying that the plan is to aggressively update it as the language progresses. And if we have in our style guide references directly to the Google style guide and they update, we get that update transitively and automatically. So I'd rather have references than statements in our guide.
Again, the task of documenting what we have now versus what we should have in the future are separate things. And I think Anna's PR documents what we have now.
But without references. That's my only caveat.
All right. We do have another item on the agenda, and there's about 20 minutes left. I wonder if we should all ponder this and weigh in the issue tracker. And I do like Ali's proposal. I think references can be added, but I don't know that has to necessarily land with the references. It would be nice, but they can also be added later. And if you're concerned that a link will be updated, I guess we could always link through something like archive.org or something else that will keep a web, snapshot of a website in time, or something like that might be useful.
Okay, so I think
I'd like to say like a final word. A bit in general. So it does seem to me like we have a very high barrier for entry into our C++ code base, which is roughly, and I'm ballparking it like half of our code. And we have a very, very small group of people who are maintaining it and progressing it. I would like to see that change. I would like to see that the barrier of entry being lower and having a bigger group discussing all of this. And thank you very much for giving me the time and listening.
Okay. Thanks for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
So really quickly, and please, if anyone disagrees with me, please feel free to object. But I'd like to request that this potentially get kicked off to a subgroup or another meeting rather than taking it to the TSC meeting in the future, because I feel like there's a very smaller subset of people that have the skill set and interest in this. And if we're to come to the TSC again, I'd much prefer it to be based on handling like an explicit dispute that we need to decide on rather than what we've spent the time on today.
So I have my hand up, so I'm going to start talking immediately. But first, I'm going to ask Miles to take his hand down. Yeah, I think we can cross that bridge when we get to it. This very well might not come back, but it might. That's all.
Okay, so let's move on to the next issue, which is number 23433, behavior of read file and write file with file descriptors.
So this was put on the agenda by Saktapriyan, who this is a very bad time for. It's the middle of the night in India right now. So we may wish to push this off to next week, but maybe just people can make a point to look at it. He feels like this issue comes up again and again and again, and wants, would like to achieve a resolution on it. And I do think that this is worth making a decision on. I do think that this is something that the status quo is pretty much less desirable than like 3 or 4 possible other things we could do. So if everybody could look at that, it's pretty. You don't need any C++ knowledge to understand it. I'm happy to report. But take a look at that one. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to add to that besides that.
I think that's certainly fair to push off to next week with basically hopefully prepare everybody prepare themselves to discuss next time.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say that there's an excellent chance that if everybody engages in the issue tracker, it won't need to be on the agenda at all next week, and that would be awesome.
Any objections? Okay, if not, let's move on to the next issue. The next one we have is tracking issue for updating TSC on board meetings. Miles, we got on that front.
Yeah, so we had a short board meeting last week, mostly going through, like at Node Interactive, mostly going through the numbers from the conference. Some ones that are interesting to share, just under 1,000 tickets sold. And I don't remember the exact numbers that I have to dig it up, but it was around a 20% growth, both in attendance and in, funds that the conference raised. Not exactly board related, but, we announced all the stuff related to the merger of the JS and Node Foundation the week before the conference. We held open town hall last week. And the meeting that has been a weekly meeting, joint board meeting to discuss the merger, we're working on opening that up and starting to broadcast it. So, everyone in the TSC and even further, all members within the org are invited to join. There's a new repo, Node.js/bootstrap. And inside of that repo, there is an issue, which is issue number 10. I will drop it in the chat. But we have all the details in there. The meeting is Mondays at 2 p.m. EDT. That's 11 a.m. PDT. There is a conflict with another group's meeting. We're in the process of trying to figure that out. But the main idea with this meeting is specifically that, one of the big feedbacks that we got at the Collaborator Summit was that it felt like we have too much of an iteration cycle where things are kind of being thrown into a black box. And that's, not the intent of how we were designing things. So we wanted to create a space where all stakeholders, from boards, from top level committees, from projects can all get together to work towards consensus in one place. So it doesn't feel like things are being handed down or being put into a black box. That's it for me for right now.
Okay, any questions before we move on? No? Okay, so in that case, we'll move on to the next issue, which is the tracking issue for the strategic initiatives, number 423. So just give me a second to open that up. So Miles, modules.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago as well, we landed a minimal kernel for modules. This is a subset of behavior that we agreed would exist in all potential modules implementations. So it's really exciting that we got that landed in our fork. You can find that fork at Node.js/ECMAScript-modules. Some of the big things with it is like, you pretty much can import ES modules. ES modules must have an MJS extension. And that's kind of it. Like we removed most of the other contentious features from the implementation. We're currently in the process of identifying what are user experience enhancements that we can do that are uncontentious, such as like improving the user experience of create require function, or how the URL APIs, different APIs could potentially use URL file strings. We don't necessarily have an answer on all these things, but it's what we're focused on right now. And then we're also doing a focus on extensible loaders that can be used for kind of building out any of the other contentious features that we have. I think we have our next meeting next week, so I would expect that, not next week, but likely the week of the 30th. So we'll have a meeting on the 31st, our yearly spooky TSC meeting. And I hopefully have some more information about modules that will hopefully not be too scary. I'll stop making Halloween puns now.
Okay, next in the list is NAPI. I guess no major things to report on there other than it's going to be a workshop at NodeConf EU. And there was some good discussions at the Collaborator Summit. One of them, hopefully bringing us a little bit closer to the Electron team in terms of, we've had some people report that it's been, at least on some platforms, modules haven't worked there. And I think, we've closed the loop in terms of hopefully being able to address some of those issues. OpenSSL evolution, so Rod.
No updates since last time on that one. Unfortunately, there's just been no movement on getting 1.1.1 going. So it's not going to be available for LTS 10 or Node 11. Unfortunately, well, immediately anyway. It should be a relatively smooth upgrade for both of those when it lands. That's the aim.
Okay, workers, Anna.
She had to go, but she said there's not much to report on workers this week.
Okay. Error messages. Joy, anything on that front?
Nothing to report this week.
Okay. Car promise APIs. I guess I don't think we have James, right? Unless he joined and I haven't noticed. No. Governance. I don't know, Miles, if you have anything additional you want to say on that front.
I think that we covered it mostly in the board-related stuff, but just stuff I didn't mention. We had a really great long session at the Collaborator Summit. It ran for almost a day and a half. You could see in that Bootstrap repo, which is kind of the result of that, there's an open issue right now, issue number 11 with the governance breakout session takeaways, and that has notes on all of the stuff that we had collected around there. Aside from that, it seems like the focus of governance has maybe shifted a little bit away from the governance of the Node.js project to the governance of a joint foundation. These do overlap when we're thinking about what does Node's representation look like. But I think perhaps we should have a discussion at some point about this particular piece, and if we want to be making sure that we make an explicit difference between foundation governance and project governance. That's it for now.
Okay. New stream APIs. I don't think we have Jeremiah. V8 currency, we don't have Michael. Async hooks, anything you'd like to say, Ali, on that front?
Nothing substantial to add. We did have a diagnostic work session at the Collaborator Summit, and there was discussion around a proposal for async context formalization. So that's a PR in the diagnostic working group, and might be useful for people to take a look at that and see how it relates to async hooks. Yeah, that's about it.
I think it's worth noting that suggests that a different model might make sense. Not that that's the agreement or consensus or anything like that, but if you're interested in async hooks or what's there already, or it's definitely worth looking at that, because it's not well, anyway, it just suggests that there might be other APIs that would make sense.
Right.
And then final, open web standards.
That one's me too.
Yep.
We had a big meeting at the Collaborator Summit as well, talking about all these different things. I think with the amount of stuff that I've been focusing on, hey, Joy, since you are leading that session and have a really great interest in this, would you be interested in taking over as champion on the open standard stuff, or at least sharing it? I'm not sure if you're in there sharing it already. My apologies if you are. But I just feel like I'm talking too much, so I'd like to share the floor.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take the responsibility. Yeah, for champion that. But is there already a strategic initiatives?
Yeah, there's a strategic initiative for open standards that has my name on it. Would you like to open a pull request and share it with me?
Yeah.
If you could, I think there's now even a repo. So as part of doing that, if you could add the link to that repo, that would be good.
Okay.
Because we have it listed in our current initiatives, but it doesn't have a reference to anything where things are taking place. And I seem to remember there maybe I'm imagining it. Wasn't there a repo that was created to?
Yep.
Yeah.
In standards, we can add that as well.
So I think adding that would make sense to just do it at the same time.
Joy, would you be able to take over giving a bit of an update from the Collaborator Summit, though?
Okay. There is a minutes. Let me open that for. Okay, here we go. So at the session, in the session at the Collaborative Summit, we have reviewed the current status of web APIs in core. Mostly just we were talking about APIs implemented and APIs tested and APIs that were implemented but not covered with web platform tests. And then we spent quite some time to discuss about the process to propose to implement a new feature, a new web feature in core. There are a lot of suggestions and things that people think that should be included in a proposal. Also, there were some strong brainstorm moments about what we should implement in core, or what web APIs that we should implement in core. And there were also a few discussions about how we should participate in standards bodies. So yeah, the majority of the content of that session is in the minutes. I'll open the pull request to the summit agenda later. So if you want to see the minutes, it's posted in the summit issue 106. Yeah.
You wouldn't happen okay, it's summit agenda issue 106. Okay. Okay, I think that's the end of the list of our strategic initiatives. So we're at the Q&A section. I did post a minute or two ago that if anybody was watching, they want to post questions. I don't see any, so unless I've got it wrong, I don't think we have any questions this week. So we've got 2 minutes left, so I'll just ask, is there anything anybody wants to discuss in that last few minutes that wasn't on the agenda? If not, okay. So I'd say let's call it for this week. And thanks for everybody who attended and everybody who watched. And we'll talk to you all next time.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Stop the stream.
No private segment.